Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I thought I'd do a care video today. So, in the growing season, feed and water well, and in the winter, not so much. Well, that's that done. Now, I'm being frivolous, but as a general rule, that's not a bad care guide. But as you know, I have a mixed bag in here of all sorts of orchids, and as far as general care is concerned, I'd say most of them get treated the same. So trying to find individual care at individual plant level is sometimes essential, especially with species. But most of us have an amount of hybrids. Some of them are complex hybrids. They've long since lost their species identity due to the hybridization taking place. But yeah, I mean, when plants are actively growing and have good conditions, which I don't have in the winter, feed and water well. But the proviso is this particular plant, does it need a wet-dry cycle or not? Does it like to be constantly moist? Is it a drinker? Yeah, will it suck up almost as much water as you can give it? So you have to differentiate to a degree, to the best of the ability in your own environments. But I mean, I'm gonna miss some out because I haven't got that good a memory for everything that I've got in here without getting my list out. But just as a generalisation, I've got some Orangus. I've got 4 different ones. 3 are doing well, 1 not so good. And the information you get, because they're all species, at individual plant level, is 3 of them come from forested areas, yeah, and don't get intense light. But 1 of them lives in quite open areas where it is actually exposed to much higher light levels. So I've got 3 that can be looked after the same, and 1 needs better light. Now, define better light in the English UK winter. Well, as good as it gets. That's the only way you can give, a high light plant, is to give it as much light as you possibly can in the UK winter. That's all you can do. If you've got artificial lighting, that's a different story, but I don't. So I'm working with a natural environment effectively. There are very few orchids that will stand a very dry atmosphere as far as the air is concerned. So if you're growing in that type of environment, you will need to artificially raise the humidity. And again, that comes down to types of plants. Things like Masdevallias and Restrepias and a lot of those cooler growers, they take very high humidity to be happy. But that level of humidity might not be suitable for all your plants. So you might need little microclimates to deal with some. But yeah, so Orangus, coming down the list alphabetically. I've got some Brassivola types. I've got 3. 1 that's now called Rhyncholalia. I doubt if that'll ever bloom, but it grows well for me. I've got Brassivola nodosa and a hybrid David Sanders. The David Sanders has never bloomed. It has 3 strong new growths. I expect it to bloom, or it will be somebody else's plant during next year. I've had it long enough for it to have bloomed by now, and it hasn't. So maybe it's just not as happy here as it needs to be. The Brassivola does okay, that blooms, so we're okay there. Coming down the list, what else? I've got some Brassias. I love Brassias. I love the spider orchids. I haven't got any species, but I've got some that are Brassia hybrids, so they're not intergenerics. Yeah, they are a mix of different types of Brassias. As far as I'm concerned, they get treated. Oh, hang on, that's my phone. Oh, that was the garage saying they are now confident my car is okay, but they're still going to keep it. It started first time this morning, having been left out all night cold, which is where the problem lies. It's the cold start. And they've retested everything to check voltages and stuff, and they're happy that it's now working properly. But they're going to keep it, and I'm going to go down tomorrow morning so that we can start it together. Yeah, he doesn't want to let it go until he's confident and he thinks I'm happy with it. The problem I've got is if I take it away tomorrow, my important weekend's coming up with the Orchid Society annual Christmas dinner, and I need to go and get my daughter up in Wiltshire, and obviously that needs a car. So the backup plan is that if I get up early Saturday morning and it doesn't start, I can get a lift down to the garage and borrow a courtesy car for the weekend. So the weekend's covered, so I feel a lot calmer now because this was starting to really get twitchy, shall we say. Right, where was I? Where did we get to? Brassicas. As far as I'm concerned, treat them the same as Oncidiums and intergenerics, with one proviso, that there's no older odontoglossum type in there that's dominant, because that needs slightly different treatment. But apart from that, good light, feed and water well when they're growing, ease off in the winter time, keep the light good, but watch out for scorching in the summer. They will take good light, and with acclimatization they'll take very good light, but no sudden changes. You know, don't suddenly go from semi-shaded to full sun through the glass, because you'll singe them. So that's those. Good temperatures, they'll take heat, they don't mind it. In fact, they grow better. As long as they're hydrated, they'll push on really well if they get extra heat. Within limits, quite honestly, if you look across the board and look at recommended temperatures for orchids, even though some of that information is a bit outdated, there aren't too many orchids that like getting up above about 27, 28 degrees C, unless they're a little bit away from the sun and have got very good hydration at the base and humidity in the air. So if the humidity's good, you can push the temperatures. If the air starts to dry, not so good, because the plant itself is going to be sucking in at the bottom, chucking it out through the leaves, and it'll have trouble replacing it and staying hydrated, because the whole plant speeds up the warmer it gets. So take care with that sort of thing. Where do we get to? Brassicas. B. Bulbophyllums. I have a few of those now. There was, not long ago, I had none. And then Orchid came along and sent me a box full of the flipping things. So I had to get my head round them relatively quick. One of the largest genus there is, and a huge variety within it. So this type of plant, you do need to get down to individual levels. Some of them are classed as warm to hot growing. Yeah, well, they're not going to like it out here in the winter. They'll stop growing. Hopefully they won't die. But then there are some that are just classed as intermediate, and some are cool growers. Yeah, so you've got to get down to plant level for those. And if you've got a hybrid, try and find out whatever went into it and take an average. That's the only thing you can do with hybrids, really. But bulbophyllums, they like to stay moist. Yeah, they don't like to stay dry at all. That won't do them any good. And again, you can't say what light levels they need unless you get down to the plant level, because some come from, you know, real tropical evergreen forest type environments where they get not such good light, and others come from more open areas where they would get better light. So you've got to get down to plant level for bulbophyllums. I don't profess to know a lot about those. I haven't had them long. So they get, all mine just get a generalized treatment. They get the light they get where they are. I don't let them dry out. You know, I let them get virtually dry this time of year, simply because they won't be growing as fast because of the shorter days. So they won't be needing as much moisture. And also through the winter, they're not getting absolutely soaked. They're just getting kept moist and then allowed to get almost dry, or even absolutely dry, but certainly for no length of time. They won't like drying out. So that's that. B, C. I've got some Coelogenes, not many, but I've got a few lurking around. I've got a couple of cristata varieties. They're named varieties, but it's still cristata. I've got a Flaccida. I've got that big monster down there with the crinkle leaves. That's Moriana Brockhurst. And many versions of this plant that I've seen, even around shows and at nurseries, have this problem. It's a thirsty plant. Unfortunately, mine objected to being repotted. possibly at the wrong time. I'm not sure, but it objected to being repotted and dumped some of its roots, which left it with a poorer root system, which will not hydrate the plant. So that's the equivalent of the Oncidium concertina leaves that shows on this one when it's not getting enough hydration. Two latest growths on that one have pushed out good root systems below them. So hopefully from now on, because it can stay in this pot for ages now, from now on, everything that grows on it should stay hydrated. It even put up a flower spike not that long ago, but it aborted. It just literally started to grow and then just died off. And that's literally, it's the same with all orchids. An orchid is only as good as what's underground, metaphorically speaking. It's only as good as its root system, and it will suffer if that isn't very good. So that's Coelogenes. What else have I got in the C range? Careful there. Cattleya types. Wet dry cycle required. Yeah. In my book, the faster the better. The longer the roots stay soggy, the more chance they are of going downhill. Fast wet dry cycle, good light Cattleyas, with a couple of exceptions. I've got a Ivanagara apple blossom. Yeah, well, this is what happens when you give it too much light. It singes. So that one gets set back. This one just doesn't get as much light as the others. It's got a lovely strong new growth on it with good leaves. I expect that growth to bloom. But quite honestly, overcooking this one set it back a bit. But since then, it's pushed out loads of new roots and a nice strong new growth. So it's recovering, but that was my fault. I didn't know that one couldn't take the higher light. There's another one I've got that I didn't realise as well until, well, I found out from others, which is good stuff, which is the Rhyncho thingy, Rhynchoredes Bangkok Sunset. Vandaceous type, but don't put it in the same light as your other Vandas, it will suffer. This one doesn't like as high a light level. See, again, it's down at individual plant level. Right. With Cattleyas, if you've got species, it's worth checking where they come from. I mean, this is Laelia anceps. That's got two lovely spikes on it. The buds are just starting to show on that one. You can just see the, well, you might be able to just see the shadow there if I get it against the light. But buds are forming inside the tops of those things. So both new growths have both spiked. Dead pleased with that. Good root system now, but doesn't like heat. Likes to stay cooler. Now that's difficult for me because obviously to give it the light it needs to get up towards the roof area, and unfortunately that's the warmest place. So what's the way round that? That's the way round that. Make sure it's in the line of fire of a fan that runs 24/7. It's not a powerful fan, it's a little computer fan, but it just sits there. So come the summer months when the big circulating fans are on during the daytime, that one can move over that side and be somewhere near a fan. Now this time of year that little computer fan gets turned off because it's actually causing a draft, whereas in the summer it'll be back on 24/7 along with the others. So again, if you've got species, check where they come from, check their true temperature range, and check to see if they are a high light plant or not quite so high light, because even Cattleyas will singe, even Vandas will singe, but most of the time it's the speedy changes that can happen, like now with this shade netting off. I've got to watch through January into February because gradually the sun will get stronger. And if I get, say, a week of cloudy, miserable weather, and then I suddenly get one of those bright, clear days, that would be quite a dramatic change, especially as the day lengths are getting longer, the sun's getting higher, and getting stronger all the time. So I really will have to be incredibly careful with that end, because that's the bit that gets the strongest light. This time of year, anyway. So I've got to be careful. Let's have a look. Where do we get to? Cattleyas. Well, then we get to the Ds, we get to dendrobiums. A wealth of horrors. I split mine into three types, really. I've got the non-resting warm growers, as I call them. That's Latorias, Phalaenopsis types, a couple of others. They just grow continuously. It's where they come from. They tend to come from evergreen forests where there is no winter. It doesn't happen. They do get a wetter season and a drier season, which is nice to try and mimic, you know. So in my winter, those plants get allowed to just dry. Then they get watered reasonably well. But certainly Latorias, from what I've heard, they are very prone to rotting near the base, especially with new growths. So what I do with those types of plants in the winter is just water around the edge of the pot and not get the base of the plant wet. And I try and pot them slightly high so that the base of the plant isn't in anything, it's sat on it. So it's raised slightly higher so that the base of the plant doesn't stay too wet. So that's those two. Nobiles, if you've got the species, then you've probably got a problem on your hands, because that's not that easy to get to bloom. But the Nobile hybrids are very tolerant. You can give them a winter rest if you like, but the chances are they don't need it. They'll bloom anyway. And this year, Nobiles have been blooming all over the flipping place. Some have been blooming in the summer on and off. I mean, I've got one in full bloom now. That's a late winter, early spring bloomer. Well, not this year, it's not. I've got no control over that. If it decides to bloom, it's going to bloom. And the fact that it is blooming, obviously I need to keep something going in at the bottom. Because if I let that totally dry off and stay dry, the blooms will drop. You know, so you have a balance, you know, use your loaf, basically, think it through. Other types I've got, continuous growers, the Fleckery. Well, you can see that's continuously growing. Look at this nice strong new growth. First cane it's produced with 3 leaves, so, you know, progress all the time. Loddigessii is a winter rester. It hasn't decided to start dropping leaves yet, even though I've reduced that watering right down. Yeah, but it's its first winter with me, so, you know, yeah, we'll see how it goes. What else have I got? I've got a moniliform. What else do I keep going? I've got a couple of iffy ones that I'm never quite sure. I can't dig names out, but I'll do pop-ups. This one back here is doing autumn on its older canes, and its latest new cane is nice and big and fat and may actually bloom, because that one hasn't bloomed for a long time. Now, that one had scale several times back in the year, which didn't do it a lot of good, but they're gone now, so it's coming on. I'll stick the name of that one because it's a funny one. And there's another one as well, which again is difficult to work out how to treat it, but it's the one with the strappy leaves right back there by the glass. And again, they're both primary crosses, and when you look up the 2 species that have gone into them, you've got a conflict of interest because they require different care. But by averaging them, they end up just becoming an ordinary dendrobium that doesn't really rest properly in the winter, just slows down and reduces the watering and the feed. But the treatment I give them doesn't stop. As I say, I'll put pop-ups for those 2 because I'll say I'm wrong if I try. Right, that's dendrobiums. That's you've got Latorias, Phalaenopsis types don't like to get cold. You've got the what I call the semi-resting ones, which I include Nobiles with those, that do need to stay drier in the winter, and you can reduce the feed right down to next to nothing. But I would suggest not letting them totally dry off for any length of time, just a bit. Yeah, just look at your canes. If they're starting to desiccate, chuck some water in at the bottom. But they say with Nobile hybrids, if you keep feeding and watering them well through the winter, you'll get a mass of kikis. I've never seen that personally, but then I've never done that to them, so I don't know. But this one, this giant, is just starting to form its nubbins. Yeah, just in some places. Only, oh, that's an old cane, couple on there. It's just starting, but given the length of time those take to go, the chances are that's still going to be end of January into February before it starts to bloom. And that's the right time. So this one's behaving itself at the moment. Other Ds, I've got Deesas. Well, I have one Deesa type, multiple plants. They're lurking up here. These have recently all been split up and repotted. They're not all doing well. There's always something in the way in this place. This potful looks pretty good. That potful had several joined plants, and it looks like, certainly if you look at the one towards the middle of the pot, to the left of it, the little plant that was joined on is dying, so that one's not going to make it. But most are nice and green, upright. I think they're going to do okay. And the little community pot of tiny ones, these were the bits left over basically. One plant's already died, so I just gently tugged that out of the pot. The rest don't look too bad. Those are to grow on. They won't bloom next year. Those should, and so should those, but probably not all of them. Just the best ones out of those should bloom. And that's Deesas. Deesas can take full sun. If their roots dry out, they die. Simple as that. But acclimatised gently, they can live outside in the UK summer and they'll do fine. You know, the nursery where these come from put a lot of their plants out, and they should know that's what they've been growing for God knows how many years, you know. So over the years they've worked on that. Mine are not going outside, they're staying in here. They don't mind heat as long as the humidity stays up. They can't stand any form of excess salts around those roots. It'll kill them. My tap water would kill these plants. They need pure water. It's essential. Rainwater, RO water, distilled, whatever the type, but very, very low levels of feed and not often. They just seem to do okay. You have to bear in mind they've got a corm on the bottom of them. So they're not like other orchids. They are different. Right, that's D's. Where are we now? E, epidendrums. And what's the other E's? I've got some, but they get the same general care as everything else. The exception is my Radicans hybrid up the back there. Those things grow like a weed. In some parts of the world where there's milder climates, these are a garden plant. Just chuck them out in the garden, they'll form a bush. Once they get going, they grow like mad. All my latest growths are spiking. Buds are just forming. That's going to be quite a show. Nice bright orange. But as far as that one's concerned, you know, those canes have just finished growing and are now spiking. Well, you know, to push those buds on and everything, there's not a lot of point in keeping that dry, is there? So that gets watered and some feed, even though it's winter time. It's growing, it's doing stuff. So that's that. What I did forget in the dendrobium world is obviously the true resting types. I've been over that so many times now. Just gradually reduce your watering into autumn, get your feed levels down until eventually they're just getting water, and then just keep reducing the frequency until it's down to next to nothing, but not nothing. Not in my book. I'm not depriving a plant of water for 2 or 3 months, because I don't believe there's anywhere in the world where that would truly happen. And most of my resting type dendrobiums are species. So I'm trying to replicate their world, and in their world they come from deciduous forests, so the leaves are gone off the trees, they're in very good light, sometimes direct sun, much cooler temperatures and hardly any rain, but they still get morning dew, and sometimes it's misty and foggy, you know, so they do get a little bit of hydration through the winter. In the summer, feed and water well. When they start growing, because of the way they grow, they've adapted to growing fast during the growing season. Yeah, well, to keep up with that speed, feed and water well. Because, you know, they've got a definitive growing season, unlike some other plants which just carry on growing year round. So they haven't got a season, not like the resting dendrobium types. I have one other resting plant, which is my Bifrenaria. But at the moment it's, I I was treating it wrong. It needed a lot more light than I was giving it, which might explain why it's never bloomed. And in addition to that, if it has any form of rest, a cheeky flipping cat. That's not my cat. Yeah, shoo. He's quite a friendly cat, but my cats object to any cat coming on their territory. We don't want any scraps, do we? Okay, where have we got to then? I've got one cymbidium that lived out in the summer, pushed out big fat bulb, and has now got 2 spikes, one of which has got a zygopetalum leaf over the top of it, which won't do it any good. So care for that is unknown because it's the only one I've got, and I didn't even bother looking it up. It stayed outside for the summer, and I watered and fed it along with my bonsai trees, and it got morning sun. And then as the temperatures started getting too much, starting to get quite cool nights, not down to freezing, but certainly below 10 degrees C, I thought it's about time to bring it in. And then I saw the 2 spikes starting, and that made the decision anyway, to get it in here where it's not going to get blasted by gales and stuff like that. So it's got a protected environment for the buds to develop. Where did we get to? E. What else have I got? Encyclias, epidendrums. No resting types in there, so if they're growing, they don't need high levels of feed. Very little does, quite honestly. E. I haven't got any Fs. G, H, I, J. It's funny how the alphabet goes quiet with orchids. You know, you get past E and nothing much happens for a while. Yeah, I am being silly, but you just think about it. You know, there aren't many orchid types that begin with, you know, that little set of the alphabet. There's just not many there until you sort of get to L, and then you've got Laelia kicks in and things like that. What else? Well, as soon as we get to the N's, I haven't got any, but M's, I've got Masdevallias. Now, I've only got a couple, and I won't say they're doing brilliantly, and I'm not an expert on them, but basically they like to stay cool, good light in the winter time, simply because of the short days, but lower light levels through the summer, and they need to stay cool. Most Masdevallias are cool growers. Some are warmth tolerant, and I've definitely got one of those that is still happy in the summer, but the other ones I've got aren't so happy. In amongst those are the Restrepias. And again, they're easy to look after, but they need high humidity, so they're not that suited to a house unless you can get that humidity up. They don't like intense light, same as the Masdevallias. You know, they like reasonable light, especially in the winter, and they like to stay cool, and neither of those two like to dry out at all. So I let mine get almost dry, and then this time of year they get an amount of water, not a lot, because I don't want them soggy with the cool, you know, the very cool temperatures overnight. And then come the summertime, they get absolutely drowned when I water them. You know, they'll take as much water and hydration as I can give them.